everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Wouter van Geluwe. I'm CTO at Adobe for Western Europe, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Tech Academy session. You could hear the beautiful waiting music. You don't know anything about me anymore. That's quite, I would say, relevant in today's context around data collection, personalization, and so on. Brands have less and less data available to really personalize experiences for customers. So that's a good entry point to today's session on data collaboration. Data collaboration is nothing new. It has been around for multiple years. Back in the days when we were implementing DMPs, I would say that data management platforms were quite useful in the context of data sharing. I think we all remember the days where third-party data was plentifully available and also second-party data. But today's context is a bit different, and in today's session, we'll go a bit deeper on that topic. This session is part of a broader series. So we've started the Tech Academy series for 2022 today. This is the first session, but we'll have multiple sessions later this year with every month a new topic being broadcast. So on June 7th, we'll focus on first-party IDs. And then on July 5, the focus will be on personalization in the same page and next page context. But today's session, as I said before, is focused on data collaboration. So you'll learn about all of the POV of Adobe on data collaboration, what's possible today in the context of today's market with third-party cookies being increasingly limited, and the need for people-based identifiers going forward. This is a Tech Academy session, so we'll go quite hands-on. We've prepared a hands-on customer journey demonstration along with a marketer journey demonstration. And of course, there will be plenty of room for Q&A. In the UI you're seeing on your screen above my head, you've got that Ask a Question box, so you can ask questions there. And my colleague, Paul van Oosterhout, will answer your questions as we go along in the chat. And at the end of the session, we'll have 10 minutes to answer questions as well. So voila, let's start. Data collaboration has a place in the overall context of one-to-one experiences. I would say many brands, all of us, are trying to personalize experiences and have been trying to do that for, let's say, 10 to 15 years. Personalization, unfortunately, has mainly been limited to building segments of a couple of hundred and thousands of customers. So while many brands have been talking about one-to-one experiences, I would dare to challenge that statement, and I would say that today's personalization isn't one-to-one at all. It is mainly focusing at grouping people in big groups, but not really making it possible to look at one-to-one at what's happening and to collect data on the individual level, to then influence every interaction across every touch point of the journey individually for that customer. And that's simply because data, profile, and content, which are the main ingredients of customer experience, are very siloed available to the teams that are working on the customer journey. Data and profile, I think, while many of us are trying to get to a one single view of each customer, I would again challenge that, and I would say that you have maybe 10 or 15 different views of the customer, but also that data is very siloed. And in general, I would say that the content side of things is not really taken into account either, with content living in a separate ecosystem again, and not really being connected to the activation ecosystem of your organization. So that's a challenge, and I would say that marketing and the whole technology ecosystem around marketing has tried to solve this. And well, I guess we all know and love acronyms. You can see a couple of acronyms on the screen behind me: DMPs, marketing automation platforms, CMSs. Since a couple of years, the new buzzword is CDPs. So many brands are now actively looking at to the CDP. To solve that problem of one-to-one experiences. And I would like to get a bit deeper on the topic as well. Acronyms are there because we like to simplify things and we like to talk about easy to recognize concepts, but in reality, it's very different. And if you look at the way that the CDP institutes defines CDP types. And by the way, this is a slide not from Adobe, but from the CDP Institute, which was created, I would say, 5 to 6 years ago. And back then, this was the representation of a CDP. So you had data sources on the left side, and you had email, mobile, web, CMS channels on the right side. And in the middle, you've got lots of data manipulations, lots of insights, lots of campaign topics. But from my perspective, from Adobe's perspective, this slide is very much outdated. And especially those channels on the right side, they should not be part of separate ecosystems. They should actually be part of the same ecosystem. The word campaign, when I see this on the slides, I would say that the word campaign gives me shivers down my spine. It doesn't really feel comfortable to talk about the word campaign anymore today, as it's very much a concept of the past, whereby brands define a campaign calendar once a year and then start pushing messages to customers without really thinking about what the message should be, when the customer would like to hear it, and so on. So again, the difference between push marketing and listening to what customers are doing is not really captured by this diagram behind me. So I think that the CDP types need a fourth CDP type, which is experience CDP. And that's really where Adobe is focused at. And there's a couple of problems we're trying to solve with that approach. I think in general, when you talk about the concept of marketing in the past, cookies and pixels are the most critical components. When you talk about retargeting, prospecting use cases, acquisition use cases, cookies and sending a pixel, dropping a pixel on the page are the concept of the past. And in tomorrow's world, we have a very different way of solving that. And to make that visual for you, I would like to go a bit in a whiteboard mode. So behind me, you can see a whiteboard of a customer experience, a customer journey in today's context, whereby the customer is interacting with brands across multiple channels. You've got email, SMS, push, in-app messages, search, social display, website, mobile applications, point of sales, branch offices, call centers, and so on. And today, customer experience is very much driven from those channels. And as such, the messages to customers are very different and not really connected to each other. And the way this has grown is the reason why this landscape is so complicated. Namely, every solution has been implemented as a standalone fix to a channel-based problem. And each solution has their own database, profile store, segmentation environment, offer environment, and journey environment. That's, I think, a very recognizable picture of where your ecosystem is today, with data that's not really connected to each other, profiles which are very different from one application to the other, but also the definition of a segment, which is very different in each environment, and offers and journeys also being very different. So how can you think about one-to-one experiences in this context? But also, how can you think about things like data governance, data strategy, consent management, and also in the end, data collaboration. I would say that you can't really properly talk about it in that context, and one-to-one experience isn't really what is possible or made possible by this diagram. So that's where the abbreviation of the CDP enters the picture. And again, many brands are looking at the CDP in a similar way as they were in the past. Namely, the CDP is a standalone solution, which is implemented, again, in a very complicated landscape. And it introduces, again, one more data store, one more profile store, one more segmentation environment, offer environment, and journey environment. People like to do things like they're used to. So if you always do what you always did, you will always get what you always got. It's a very simple statement. But implementing a CDP as one more standalone solution in your ecosystem is basically just it isn't really simplifying the problem. On the contrary, it's making the problem even worse. So from our perspective, again, a CDP should not be considered in this context, as it will only add to the problems and not solve anything. That's where a CDP should be looked at as a real platform, a true platform that sits behind the channels, and that then slowly starts to consume the complexity that's above. And that's how we have looked at the CDP. And that's also how the data collaboration use case will provide much more value to you in your organization. So as you start implementing a CDP in a platform mindset, you will see that slowly it will start to consume the data and the profile environments which are on top of the platform, and start to replace it by a much more simple concept of doing things once and reusing it in a limitless way. So doing things once means collecting data once, having one single view of a customer profile, one single definition of the segment, of an offer, and the journey. And that's how you build one-to-one experiences. And that's how you make sure that data collaboration, but also data governance, consent management, privacy topics, and so on, are really part of the DNA of the organization in a holistic and structural way. So that's a quick introduction to the topic at hand. We'll come back to this whiteboard as part of the presentation, but I would like to go a bit forward. So let me share my screen again and share a couple of slides. Obviously, you can't have a conversation about marketing topics these days without talking about cookies. Cookies obviously are going away step by step. The third-party cookies are decreasing in value constantly. And I would say that by mid next year, we'll see them disappear completely. And at the same time, consumers have different expectations. They want to provide less data to you, but at the same time, they have higher expectations when it comes to experiences. At the same time, browsers like Safari, as an example, with ITP, are adding restrictions on how data can be accessed. And then, well, as a brand and with your partners, there is still very much a need for data exchange use cases, data collaboration use cases, but it needs to happen in a trust-conscious way, whereby the customer's choices are being respected and enforced in an automated way. So that's, I think, a nice picture of where we are today. If you look at what that means from a customer journey, there's a whole bunch of things to take into account as well. So as a customer interacting with your brand, you only basically get to see a small part of of who I am as a customer. So as a bank in this example, you will know about my products around insurances and investing and loans and so on. But the rest of the world is invisible to you as an organization. And that's what we're trying to solve with Segment Match and with data collaboration as part of the platform, is basically give you a way to implement a partnership so that you can get a better picture of who the customer is, also in other industries and along other traits, but then basically start to build out that view again in a privacy conscious way, because that last part, privacy conscious way, is obviously critical in today's context. This will all help you build better journeys, so deliver more relevant journeys. I would say if you look at today's context, again, from a banking perspective, you can see this journey above me. The circles in red are touch points, interactions between the customer and the bank directly. The circles in black represent communication that happens through different brands, through partners, and so on. But the lack of these simple data points leads to a very disconnected journey. In this example, the customer was active on the bank's website looking at credit cards, which made the customer qualify for that credit card segment. And a couple of weeks later, that customer is still qualifying for the credit card segment. But the fact that this customer has shown an interest or a data point on a telco website where they've accepted a new homeowner's deal means that as a bank, you should change the way you communicate to that customer, but you don't have that data point. So how can you respond to it? Simply said, you can't. And that's again where data collaboration will help you move forward and make things easier for you. Now, if we look at where we come from, again, from a DMP perspective, data share was quite useful, quite plentifully available again. You could simply purchase these data points from third-party vendors. Typically, you've got three types of use cases here: personalization, reaching known customers across a variety of channels, including owned but also paid, and also prospecting. I would say most of the customers that I've worked with in the past have always been very much focused on this prospecting use case. whereby they would use real-time bidding, so retargeting across programmatic inventory to personalize the experience of customers across publisher websites, using DSPs and so on. And it's mainly that specific use case that's impacted by the changes that have happened in the ecosystem. So really this programmatic includes programmatic retargeting is diminishing in terms of value consistently. And again, that's where a solution like data collaboration, a different approach can help you reach more customers in a more consistent way still. Now, what's the future? So again, a couple of strategies that you can find out about. So on this diagram, you can see the precision versus scale topic. We've basically combined 4 tactics here. As you can see, that many publishers are evolving into a direct communication with customers, whereby you as a brand enrich data at the DSP level, at the SSP level. That's going to be helpful, of course, for targeting on specific social search display channels. But again, we're talking not just about social search display, but we're talking about the whole customer journey everywhere. So that won't help you alone. So you need to have a different approach as well. And we can still see, again, a big impact on the programmatic targeting of unknown audiences going forward, whereby especially the unknown visitors are very difficult to personalize experiences for. But of course, let's change gears a bit. I would like to ask you a couple of questions before we move forward into the demonstration. So I would like you to take out your smartphones and basically scan the QR code that you can see on my screen, which will open up a Mentimeter survey. And I'd like to ask you, as I said, a couple of questions to see if we're all on the same page and what kind of trends we can analyze in the group that's currently on this webinar. So let's scan the code. You should be seeing the survey, and I'll give you a minute to connect. Yep. You can see people connecting. That's great. So good. Let me ask the first question. So let me just click here, and then you'll see the first question. So currently, are you as an organization running data sharing, data collaboration use cases in a production environment? Okay, so we can see a clear trend here. I would say that the majority is not using any data from other partners yet in organizations. So that's, I think, consistent with what we see in the market. Let's move forward to the next question. How big is the impact of current limitations on cookies for you as an organization? Is it not too bad? Are you seeing a decline here and there a bit, but not so much? Is it impacting all your use cases already with a huge impact on performance, or has it become really impossible to meet your specific goals? So it looks like the majority of you are seeing the impact here and there a bit, but not so much yet. I realized that I think for the last 2 or 3 years, the topic of third-party cookies has been hyped a bit, and then you can, I think, even in my LinkedIn feed, I can see 25 articles on a daily basis on the third-party cookie impact. The fact that it's starting to hurt here and there a bit is mainly linked to the, I think, Safari, which has limited a big part of the personalization we can do there. I think in this context, it's useful to mention again our next Tech Academy session on first-party ID, because the first-party ID capability that Adobe released last month will be very helpful to give you a consistent way in tracking customers beyond the 7-day limitation of ITP, but still in a privacy conscious way, which is subject to consent of the customer, of course. That's good to see. Now, a question that's very easy to answer. Would you like to receive data from a partner? So do you have use cases in your head that would include data from a third-party vendor that you currently don't have? So the majority of the group is, again, quite aligned. So most companies are looking to receive partner data, are looking to enrich first-party data with other organizations' first-party data to have an impact on the customer journey. So this is quite clear from an answer perspective. But now I'm also very interested to hear your answer to the next question, because it's one thing to receive data, but do you think that your organization is open to sharing data to others? So 3 answers here, yes, no, and I'm afraid to ask. Yeah. So again, we can see a clear trend here. Most of you have an organization that's not really open to sharing data to others. From being active in this space for over a decade, I think most data sharing, data collaboration has been bidirectional. So we share data with you, but you share data with us again in return. So that's at least something to take into account, because in the end, when a different brand wants to share data with you, there needs to be a reason for them to do so. Obviously, the reason can be monetary, but I think in most cases, sharing data back is what's preferred. But anyway, good to see. And then the last question I had for you today, if you think about partner data, would you like to use that, like in the past, mainly for search social display interactions? Or are you looking for a more broader approach whereby that partner data would also impact on-site and in-app experiences, would also be used for email, SMS, push, and even be used for optimizing experiences across call center, branches, point of sales environments, and CRM? So great to see. I think there's no one single answer to this question. It's good to see that you're seeing the importance of all channels at the same time. If you look at the whiteboards from a couple of minutes ago, many brands come from a point solution mindset in an isolated, siloed landscape. Moving forward and using that relevant customer data in an omnichannel environment is, again, quite crucial. So it's great to see that you share that mindset, whereby I think all channels are important, and that obviously it's important to have a single brain for communication and orchestration behind all of this that can coordinate access and activation of that data in a broader ecosystem. Good. That concludes our survey. So thank you for your participation in that survey. Let's move forward to the next step. Good. So let's go a bit deeper into the how. Obviously, from a marketing and technology perspective, the whiteboard that you could see before needs a way to be implemented. It needs a way to function. And while data share and data collaboration can take place in a variety of ways, including the legacy ways of basically taking an Excel sheet and sharing an Excel sheet to a vendor. I've seen that happen multiple times, and I guess it still happens in the industry. But also sending data to API endpoints, basically sending your data outside to other API endpoints which you don't control anymore. Those are the ways that in the past have been used to share data. But again, I ask you the question, how do you apply data governance to that? As you are basically handing over the ownership of that data to a third party, to a second party. I would challenge you on the fact that this is not really the best way forward. From an Adobe perspective, we've got this common platform for data, profile, content, and AI, which is the Adobe Experience Platform. And on top of that platform, we've built services which then reuse that same data, profile, content, segment, offer, journey, ecosystem from an activation perspective. In this case, we'll focus a bit on the Adobe Real-Time CDP application service, as that's really the location of the data collaboration capabilities of the platform. So let's have a look. From a data perspective, of course, the types of data that you collect are quite various. You would obviously collect person data, profile attributes, but also it's important to make the distinction between known customers and unknown customers. They also have a place in the CDP environment, along with their behavioral data. So what have they done? What kind of events have taken place, again, in an omnichannel landscape. On top of that, you've got customer preferences. So how do you build trust with customers? It's really by asking customers to make choices about how you can speak to them, and then obviously applying those choices going forward. And then also, how do you build and manage those audiences, those segments, in a omnichannel landscape? If you think about the channels like that we discussed before, it's quite extensive. It's quite a broad coverage in terms of channels. But if you want to be consistent in your delivery mechanisms, obviously the segment that you use or the audience you use has to be consistent across all of those environments. So those four things, profile data, event data, customer preferences, and the audiences they belong to, need to be aligned in a very consistent way to make an impact in the customer journey. Now, trust, as I said before, is critical. In trust, there are a number of levels. First of all, as an organization, you need to have the ability to isolate data at the operational level, so at the brand level, at the market level, to ensure that no team can access data that they shouldn't have access to. On top of that, as a brand, you need to have the ability to define your data usage governance policies once and enforce them automatically. That's very important, I would say, for the data collaboration use case, because if customers don't consent for their data to be shared to partners, then they should be automatically enforced on the platform so that it can't be, so that no mistakes basically can happen going forward. And then from Adobe's approach, if you look at what we're doing at the platform level, we join your first-party data in an environment that can be used for activation as well. The customer trust layer is point and center here. It undermines everything. And then the collaboration is made possible for 2 or more brands to share their first-party data using common identifiers. The word identifier is quite broad here, but we'll go a bit deeper soon, as we are looking at identifiers which are no longer just cookie-based identifiers. Now, let's move forward and have a look at a use case. In general, we have a number of use cases which we can find. High level, you can see it on the screen. You've got the brand to publisher use case, whereby a brand and the publisher work together and basically share audiences between each other, which helps brands discover and match first-party data audiences against inventory. That's a more typical DMP use case from the past. And then you've got the brand-to-brand relationship, whereby 2 brands, like for instance a retailer and a telco, work together and sharing data directly to each other. And that then opens up a whole bunch of use cases. There's much more than just what's on the screen, and we'll go a bit deeper in the next seconds. obviously, the suppression use case, which comes from the DMP background, also is available in the CDP using partner data. And a nice example would be that, for instance, a bank that works together with a telco company. That telco company is aware of the fact that somebody has just moved houses. Then the ability to send that data point at that segment to the bank would help the bank optimize their advertising strategies. They could then stop the mortgage loan retargeting use cases, and instead they could focus on home insurance use cases. We can think about a number of collaborations there in a bidirectional way that use the same kind of or similar kind of data points. From a use case perspective, I'd like to go a bit deeper, and we've basically built out a use case which was quite common in the past, and it's still very relevant. So what you're seeing behind me is a customer journey demonstration of Luma. Luma is a retail company, and at this moment you've got an anonymous unknown customer active on the website. This customer will now identify by creating an account. So obviously creating an account is critical, as going forward the ability to share audiences on third-party cookies isn't there anymore. So the advised way is to look into a more people-based identifier, which could include things like a hashed email address or a hashed mobile phone number, which then can be matched against somebody else's inventory as well. Equally important is the consent. So on the screen behind me, you can see the consent choices there. The second to last option is the one that's where it says, I agree to share my data with Luma's partners. That's a critical choice to make, because without providing that consent, obviously no data can and will be shared between brands going forward. Now, after creating that account, you'll see that the customer's unknown profile is enriched with additional data points. So you will see things like email address and mobile phone number attached to the profile, along with first name and last name, and much more. But now, as a customer who's active on this website, as an example, I'm interested in football shirts. So Luma is a retailer, sports retailer, which sells football shirts. And as an example, in this case, I would show an interest in the Manchester City jersey. This is a data point collected by Luma, and it basically can be used to understand what kind of preference applies to me. So by collecting these experience events in real time, also a segment will qualify for me. And in this case, it's a segment for Man City fans. That's what Luma has built and is using to personalize my experience on the Luma website. But equally, that segment can be used in the collaboration with a third party, with the second party organization. So if I then move forward and introduce you to a second demo brand, which is City Signal. City Signal is a telco organization, and that is at this moment the same customer is active on the website at City Signal, but again is currently unknown, has not logged in yet, so we don't know who this customer currently is. So there's no behavior yet, and this panel behind me is empty. But now, by going to the sports page, you can see that this customer is basically showing an interest in the sports offering, the sports package. It can be added as an upsell to an existing TV package. And in this case, the page that I'm seeing here is quite generic. You can see a subscription page for the Jupiler Pro League, which is the Belgian Football League. And it also calls out the Serie A, La Liga, the Bundesliga. So it's very generic. It's very high level. And surely there's a way to do better with this kind of communication. So when this customer then logs in and authenticates on the website, you will see that this profile is going to be enriched, not just by first-party data owned by City Signal, but you'll also see that because the same email address and the same mobile phone number are being used by this customer on the City Signal webpage, you'll then see that the segments that qualify now includes the Manchester City segments coming from the Luma environment. So you can see the segment from Luma, which collects the sports interests, the preferred team interest being shared to City Signal, which will then impact the use cases they can achieve. So when the same customer then goes back to the sports page, you'll now see that there's a different kind of communication that's taking place. Based on the Man City segments, you can now see a banner for which is more oriented to Man City, which would be more relevant to me as a customer. And at the same time, the text underneath the offer is adapted, which contains now a reference to the Premier League games, to see Kevin De Bruyne play, etc. So all of this is personalized based on the team interest collected by Luma. And there's again a whole variety of use cases which come to mind between a retailer and a telco. But yeah, I will let you use your imagination, because in the end, your creativity will lead to great partnerships and great use cases. So the customer journey now comes to an end. I just wanted to quickly highlight on the whiteboard what has happened, and then we'll go a bit deeper as well into how it was configured. So what you see behind me is a representation of Adobe Experience Platform. By the way, there's a full architecture video which we'll share as part of the follow-up email after the event. And in this case, you can see two environments. One is owned and operated by Luma, and the second one is owned and operated by City Signal. And as you'll see on the whiteboard, there's a clear line between those two environments, as they're completely separated from each other. They're completely isolated from each other, and no raw data is exchanged from one environment to the other in any circumstances. But when they collect data, so data collection happens in a similar way. The website sends data into the Adobe Edge, which then leads to data being collected as part of the customer's profile. And as that data becomes available on the customer profile, it can be used to drive personalization use cases. From an activation perspective, there are three ways of using that data in the platform. You can use it through API access for one-to-one use cases, but also for segment-based use cases. And the same applies to City Signal. So whenever they collect data, all of that data is collected in their specific Adobe Experience Platform instance. And the same kind of activation mechanisms exist there as well. So API, segment-based, and one-to-one based. And now what has happened in the relationship between Luma and City Signal is that they have basically started a partnership. They are collaborating on data, and Luma has enabled a data feed which sends specific segment information to City Signal. And it's very important to call this out and to properly understand it. Only segment information is shared. So that means the segment qualification and the ID of the customer, but no raw data is sent from Luma to City Signal, only the segment membership, which contains the segment ID, the segment name, and then the customer identifier. And this is a feed which is owned and controlled by Luma. So whenever Luma decides to stop that feed, they have the ability to do so. And it's also important to call out the fact that the feeds between the two AEP instances, so between Luma and City Signal, is updated once every 24 hours. So the segment that qualifies on the Luma website will be available for City Signal within 24 hours for retargeting across their specific connected channels. That's in a nutshell what has happened so far. To call out a couple of things, there's control. So Luma decides and controls what happens, when it happens, and when it stops from happening. There's a direct connection between the two AEP instances, and it's so as such it's privacy safe. Consent is enforced in an automated way, and if consent changes as well in the past, then obviously a customer who accepted data sharing today and then doesn't accept it tomorrow anymore, that will be reflected in that data communication, and this data subject will then be taken out of the segments as well. Now, to go a bit deeper on the how, I've got a customer journey demonstration, a marketer journey demonstration for you. So behind me, you can see the Adobe Experience Platform environment that is powering the Luma and the City Signal environments. First of all, I wanted to highlight on the consent part. So as part of the schema, so the data model that's implemented in this Luma AEP instance, you'll see that we have a consents field group, which collects all the different consent levels that a customer can choose from. In this case, the data share option is being used. And as you could see in the customer journey demonstration, when the customer created the account, at that moment, the consent level was collected and stored against the schema inside the platform in Adobe. That's critical. Without this flag being collected and set to yes, data will not be shared to anybody, never. So the next step is then, of course, to look at the customer's profile. So this is a customer profile that I've used yesterday for a demonstration perspective, where you can see that value equals yes on the profile. So on the individual customers level, that's how it is stored and visualized. And then secondly, we have got the segments that are built by Luma. So you can see the segment for Real Madrid fans. You've got one for Man City fans. And theoretically, you could expand this quite quickly to dozens of other segments. Once you've built those segments, you can then start sharing them with a partner. That's the next step. To make that possible, Luma needs to set up a data feed together with City Signal. At this moment, there are no data feeds available yet in the UI, but by managing the partners in here, you can find this specific connection ID. This connection ID is something that Luma then needs to share to City Signal. As part of the partnership, they will share that connection ID. And in this case, I'm shifting to a different AEP instance, which is a City Signal environment. And in there, they don't have any feeds yet. But by managing partners and adding that connection ID into their segment match environments, they'll then be able to send a formal request to Luma to request the ability to use their data. So by submitting this, you can see the data feeds and the partner being created, which now leads to a request sent to Luma. So what you're seeing now behind me is the screen that the Luma marketers then see. They've got the one awaiting a connection request, which is the one from the City Signal environment, and they can then, of course, accept or reject it as they wish. By clicking accept, then at that moment, we've got that connection going between those two AEP instances. And then the next part is obviously to create a data feed. So as part of the setup, you then have the ability to name your data feed, like in this case for football fans. And then things get interesting and important. There are two things to select here. One is the data governance policy. So what you're seeing here is all available policies configured in the platform. You can see one for segment match, and that policy basically looks at the consent flag of the customer to use that to then decide if the data can or cannot be shared with partners. So with that segment match data governance policy selected, the next step is to define the identifiers. So in here you can see things like hashed phone numbers, hashed email addresses, but also IDFAs and Google Ad IDs. They can all be shared as part of segment match, and they will then be used to calculate the addressable audience that is available for targeting by the partner. So again, in this case, you can select then the identity settings as and how you see fit. And then the next step includes selecting the segments. So really selecting your football-based segments and then making them available to that partner. And as we click through, then the feed itself will be defined end-to-end. We're sharing this data to the City Signal environment. And from there, the data will start flowing. As I said before on the previous screen, during the whiteboard, the data feed will update once every 24 hours. So it's currently in the pending state, and then in the next 24 hours, those segments will become available for City Signal to use. So if we now switch again to City Signal, you can then see a received data feed that exists, which is a Luma football fans feed, which contains the segments that have been shared by Luma to City Signal. And now, of course, those segments can be used to start an activation use case. So if we then have a look at the segment environments, You have the ability to create a segment in the AEP UI, which will then make reference to those externally collected segments through segment match. So when you go to audiences, you then have the ability to select segment match, take segments from Luma, and then basically drag and drop those segments on top of the canvas and potentially enrich them with other data points that you have collected yourself directly. And with that segment created, at that moment, that segment becomes targetable. So applications like Adobe Target will be able to use it for on-site personalization or in-app personalization. But also Adobe Journey Optimizer will be able to use this segment and the data and the profiles associated to it as part of email use cases as a mass push in-app. But also when this customer would call the call center, and the call center is connected to the platform, the call center service agent would then also see that this customer is a Man City fan. And similarly, if this customer would walk into a branch office and have a physical meeting with one of your colleagues, at that moment, that colleague would also see the segment memberships of this customer and be able to include that as contextual elements to the conversation that they will have over there. So really a centralized point to collect data, profile, segment information, and then use that consistently from an activation perspective so that every advisor across your whole ecosystem has the same data available to work from. A last thing I wanted to show you here in the UI, using a different data feeds, is the overlap analysis. So when you look at the feeds that we've built here, this feed has run a couple of times, and we'll be able to show you what kind of overlap analysis in terms of addressable audiences exists. So you'll then see behind me on the screen the analysis that's shown. So you can analyze by segment, and then you can see for each segment how many identities can be shared and what the overlap is with the partner. So you can already see the value of the segment before actually sending it to the partner. So with that, we can conclude this demonstration part. I just wanted to highlight a couple of takeaways that you've seen in this video. So segment match is a capability that's available generally since a couple of months in the platform. It gives you a self-service partner setup, so you don't need Adobe to help you set up those connections. You can do it directly yourself. And it's instant in the sense that when you share your connection ID to the partner, they can immediately configure it and start using that. Secondly, from a workflow perspective, it's very easy to make it to share those segments and see the overlap between the two environments. So you can pre-share the segments and see again have the insights before actually sharing any specific data. And then the last point is really focused on sharing the segments which appear as audiences that can then be combined with other data points that you collect yourself. And so you can have a combination of first-party data that you collect and second-party data coming from your partner in one and the same segment. So that leads to an overall, I think, technically a great solution that's privacy conscious and allows you to share that data without any without having to think about the complexity of consent and privacy and data governance around it. But, well, one thing I wanted to still highlight as part of this, technology is awesome, but it's only just technology. So having a platform that allows you to share data between with partners is just one part, but it's much more important to have the creativity and the ideas behind what use cases provide value to you as a business. And that's where I think most organizations often struggle. Not everybody is as creative to think about use cases that would impact your business quite well. So that's where I think there needs to be a shift from a people process perspective internally so that teams work better and have more ways to brainstorm with each other and understand what could be useful. And that's where I would like to go back to the whiteboard that you saw before. So you can see the same whiteboard from a couple of minutes ago, but now you see these Lego figures. They basically represent your different teams across your organization. Your teams are very much structured, as you can see here, at the channel level focusing on their specific channel, and designing an experience for their specific channel. And to be fair, that's again how we have done it always in the past. But it's not because we've always done it in the past that we should keep doing it going forward. So the people process element in your transformation project for one-to-one experiences requires you to look at these teams in a different way. And the skills of these people are all critical, but they should be combined in a much better way than before. These teams should be able to define what the holistic experience is as a brand just once. Instead of doing that at the channel level, they should be doing it at the platform level. So that's why a shift needs to happen in your organization. And these Lego figures, they basically need to move down a bit, and they should take their skills, their experience, their ideas and use cases, and combine them at the platform level. And that's often something that many brands fail to do properly. And as such, they keep having that siloed, channel-based mindset, which again doesn't really help you move forward into a more one-to-one experience way, and it doesn't help you transform either. In the end, these teams should not be building an experience for the channel, but they should be building one single experience centrally, which then allows them to create journeys, which then leads to offers, segments, profile, and data being used. But then, of course, that experience should be driven consistently towards all channels, again, consistently, again, in real time, again, using the same data points everywhere. And that's, I think, the most critical part of any kind of transformation project. Implementing a platform like AEP, like Adobe Experience Platform, alone isn't enough. Your teams have to change. And with that, there's a process internally, which also has an impact on KPIs, on how you compensate or provide incentives for users, for customers, for employees to do better. That's really I think the team element that I wanted to add as well. Now, if we look at the takeaways for today's presentation, are you ready for data collaboration? That's question number one. I think, first of all, you need a platform like Adobe Real-Time CDP. If you look at the way the architecture has been created to be compliant with consent, with data governance policies, with privacy, etc., there's a need to be on the same platform. So first of all, the segment match capability that I've just presented to you is available between two Adobe Experience Platform instances. So you need to have an AEP instance to make use of this. And when you do, then you have the ability to implement your privacy framework, your consent strategy. You then have the ability to define the hash identifiers you want to use and start ingesting them properly. And then you can start prioritizing your use cases. You could see in the beginning, you've got personalization, known customer optimization, and then the prospecting use case. My guess is that most of you are interested in the prospecting use case. That will lead to the priority definition as well. And with those elements together, you can then move forward in actually implementing cases. Now, you don't have to do it yourself completely. The Adobe team, me and myself included, is available to you to follow up with you directly on the use cases that you have. We can connect you to other customers who are in the same situation. We've recently started a formal customer community initiative across Europe in which we bring customers together around specific topics. We have one session scheduled in June that's going to be focused on segment match, but then from a very hands-on perspective. So we'll have organizations like various banks, telcos, retailers join us in that session and work together directly with each other to define what use cases could potentially lead to identifying partners that you can help you implement use cases. So Adobe can help. We can be that liaison between you and a potential data partner. And well, don't hesitate to contact us to do so. And then really to get started is use your creativity. I've used this word a couple of times. So think about partnerships within your industry. Think about partnerships outside your industry, and then that will lead to the use cases that you can build. When doing this when implementing a segment match policy, a data collaboration effort, you need to focus and you need to have enough use cases to justify the time you spend on implementing it. So commit to at least 5 use cases that will make it possible to take the most out of that partner data. And then lastly, I would say that the team structure will determine the success. While some of you may be tempted to just migrate DMP use cases to a CDP platform and still only use that partner data for social search display channels, I would again challenge you and call out the need for consistently using that data point throughout the organization to also impact experiences across any other channel. So with that, we've come to the end of our formal presentation. Let me just check with Paul if there are any outstanding questions in the chat. Paul, I'm not sure if you can comment. Okay, it seems not. So it seems that there are no questions anymore. Okay, very well. Then I've got one last thing to ask you before we disconnect from today's session. So we would like to have your feedback, obviously, after this presentation. So we've got this QR code on the screen, and Paul will also share the link to the survey in the chat. If you could please scan this QR code or click the link that's shared in the chat box and give your feedback to this session, about the session, that will help us optimize future sessions as well. With that, I would like to thank you for your participation today. Wish you a great day, and I hope to see you again on June 7th, when we'll talk about first-party IDs and how they will help you limit visitor counts and keep a consistent profile beyond 7 days, also on Safari, on macOS and iOS. Thanks a lot, and have a great day.